The intake officer barely looked up when Elijah Thompson shuffled through the steel doors of Blackwater Penitentiary. Another body, another number, another aging black man swallowed by the system. But if anyone had been paying attention, really paying attention, they might have noticed something strange. The way his eyes swept the intake room wasn't the darting, nervous scan of a frightened first-timer. It was methodical, calculated, the visual sweep of someone mapping exits, counting guards, and cataloging threats before his feet even crossed the threshold. They didn't notice. No one ever does when you're 52 years old, 285 pounds, moving with the shuffle of a man twice your age, leaning heavy on a wooden cane like it's the only thing keeping you upright. Thompson. Elijah James, the officer droned, scanning his paperwork. Parole violation. Unlicensed weapon. 12 months. EJ nodded slowly, his gray beard catching the harsh fluorescent light. 12 months. Exactly what he'd calculated. Exactly what he needed. Cell block? He asked quietly, his voice carrying the rasp of someone who'd lived hard and spoken less. C block. Move along. C block. 2 blocks away from A block. 2 blocks away from Darius. 2 blocks away from his son. 3 weeks earlier, EJ had been sitting in his small apartment in Baltimore when the envelope arrived. No return address. Just a single photograph, inside his son, Darius, walking across a prison yard and a red circle drawn around his head. On the back, 3 words in block letters, 8 days left. EJ's hands hadn't shaken in 30 years. Not in Fallujah, not in Kandahar. Not during the Black Ops mission in Yemen that earned him a commendation he couldn't tell anyone about. But holding that photograph, staring at his son's face, a face he hadn't seen in person for 15 years, his hands trembled. He'd made the call within an hour. Not to the police, not to lawyers, to a man he'd served with who owed him a favor. The kind of favor you don't ask about. I need a parole violation, clean, believable, and I need to land at Blackwater in 2 weeks. The voice on the other end had paused. Blackwater's maximum security. You sure? My son's there, and someone's planning to kill him. Another pause. Then, consider it done. Now, shuffling down the corridor *** towards C block, EJ let his body sag, let his feet drag, let every inmate and guard who glanced his way see exactly what they expected to see. A broken old man with nothing left to lose. Except everything they saw was a lie. The cane in his hand? Weighted. Reinforced. Built specifically for close-quarters combat by a man who'd spent 3 decades learning how to turn anything into a weapon. The gray beard and extra weight? Deliberate. Gained over 6 months of preparation, transforming himself from the 220-pound Delta Force operator he'd been into someone unrecognizable. Someone who looked helpless. The shuffle? Muscle memory he'd practiced 10,000 times until it became natural. Until even he almost believed it. Because Elijah E.J. Thompson wasn't in Blackwater by accident. He wasn't another casualty of the justice system. He was on a mission more dangerous than any he'd faced in 30 years of warfare. He was here to save his son, a son who didn't know he was coming. A son who wouldn't accept his help if he did. A son who'd spent 15 years hating him for choosing his country over his family, for missing birthdays and graduations and every moment that mattered. A son named Darius, who'd stopped returning his letters 5 years ago. As EJ reached his cell and met the cold stare of his cellmate, a wiry white man, covered in faded tattoos. He thought about the intelligence he'd gathered before surrendering himself to arrest. The Aryan Guard, Kyle, Reaper, Hendricks. The planned race riot, the hit list with Darius's name circled in red. 8 days, the note had said. That was 3 weeks ago, which meant he had 5 days left. 5 days to locate the threat, identify the players, dismantle the plan, save his son's life, all without Darius ever knowing his father was there. If this story has you hooked, don't scroll past without subscribing. Seriously, you're about to witness a father's impossible mission unfold inside the most dangerous place on earth, and every scene gets more intense. Hit that subscribe button right now, because if you skip it, you'll regret it when you're desperately searching for part 2. But here's what no one inside Blackwater knew yet. EJ's past wasn't just dangerous. It was legendary. The kind of legend that gets whispered about in dark corners of military bases. The kind of name that makes hardened operators go quiet. And the Aryan Guard? The vicious white supremacist gang that ran C-Block with brutal efficiency? They'd just identified their next victim. The fat old black man with the cane who moved too slow and kept his eyes down. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that they'd just marked a man who'd eliminated high-value targets in 12 different countries. A man trained to survive situations that would break normal humans. They thought they'd found prey. They'd actually just woken up a predator. And the wooden cane EJ carried? Tomorrow morning in the cafeteria, when Reaper's lieutenant knocked it out of his hands and dumped a food tray on his head in front of 300 inmates, that's when everything would change. That's when they'd learn what happens when you mistake a warrior's patience for weakness. But first, EJ needed to make it through his first night without anyone discovering why a 52-year-old man with a cane could sleep soundly in maximum security while killers prowled the darkness around him. What do you think the Aryan Guard will do when they first corner EJ? Drop your predictions in the comments below. The morning count came at 5:47 a.m., guards rattling their batons against cell bars like a metal symphony of misery. EJ was already awake. Had been for 2 hours. Actually, old habits from 3 decades of pre-dawn operations never died. While his cellmate, a scrawny meth dealer named Rick with a teardrop tattoo, snored through the noise. EJ had been doing something no one would expect from a fat old man with a cane. Push-ups. 200 of them. Silent. Controlled. The kind that built functional strength, not show muscles. Then came the disguise. The careful slouch. The pained shuffle. The gray beard he stroked like it bothered him. By the time Rick woke up, EJ was just another broken old-timer leaning heavy on his wooden cane, moving like gravity had declared war on his joints. Breakfast was at 6:30. EJ joined the line of orange jumpsuits, shuffling toward the cafeteria. His eyes working behind their tired disguise, cataloging faces, noting gang affiliations by tattoos and groupings, mapping the social architecture of violence that governed Blackwater. And then he saw him, Darius. His son sat 3 tables away in the far corner, surrounded by other black inmates. 28 years old now. Tall, like his mother. Stronger than EJ remembered, with shoulders that hadn't existed when he was 13, the last time EJ had seen him in person, before a deployment that turned into 3 years of black sites and missions that didn't officially exist. Darius laughed at something his tablemate said, and the sound hit EJ like a flashbang grenade. 15 years. 15 years of letters returned unopened. 15 years of missed phone calls. 15 years of being a ghost in his own son's life. EJ forced himself to look away. Looking too long would draw attention, would raise questions, would destroy everything before the mission even began. He grabbed his tray, powdered eggs, burnt toast, something that might have once been sausage, and found a seat alone at the edge of the cafeteria. Kept his head down, ate slowly. The picture of a man who wanted no trouble. That's when they found him. 4 of them. White. Tattooed. Moving with the coordinated swagger of predators who'd done this dance 100 times before. The leader was a bull-necked man in his 30s with a shaved head and a spiderweb tattoo crawling up his neck, one of Reaper's lieutenants. Behind him, 3 more gang members, fanned out in a loose formation that blocked any easy escape. The cafeteria went quiet in sections, like a wave rolling outward. Inmates knew what was coming. Guards pretended not to notice. Some fights you let happen to establish order. Well, the lieutenant said, his voice carrying across the now silent space. Look what we got here. Old-timer thinks he can just walk into our house without showing respect. EJ kept eating. Slow, steady. His heart rate didn't change. His hands didn't shake. He'd faced Taliban commanders, Somali warlords, and cartel sicarios who'd killed more people than these punks had years on Earth. I'm talking to you, old man. The lieutenant's hand shot out fast, vicious, and knocked EJ's cane to the floor with a clatter that echoed like a gunshot. EJ looked up slowly. met the man's eyes, and in that half-second, something passed between them. "Danger. You gonna pick that up?" the lieutenant sneered, trying to reclaim the moment. "Or do we need to teach you how things work in here?" 3 tables away, Darius had stopped eating, was watching now. Watching the old black man being cornered by white supremacists. EJ could feel his son's eyes on him. This was the moment. The first test. Respond too weakly, and they'd escalate until he had no choice. Respond too strongly, and he'd blow his cover before he'd gathered enough intelligence to protect Darius. He reached down slowly for his cane, fingers closing around the weighted wood. But the lieutenant's boot came down on it first. I said. The man leaned close enough that EJ could smell his breakfast. "Do we need to teach you?" Behind them, Reaper himself had entered the cafeteria. Watching, evaluating. The real test hadn't even begun. And somewhere in EJ's peripheral vision, his son was standing up from his table. What happens when a father must choose between protecting his cover and protecting his dignity in front of the son who thinks he's a coward? EJ let the disrespect wash over him like rain. When the lieutenant's boot came down on his cane, he simply released it. Let it go. Stood up slowly, painfully, like a man whose joints screamed with every movement. "No trouble," he said quietly, raising his empty hands. "Just want to do my time." The lieutenant's face twisted with contempt. He grabbed EJ's tray and hurled it. Powdered eggs and burnt toast exploded across EJ's orange jumpsuit, dripping down his chest while 300 inmates watched in silence. Darius was still standing at his table, fists clenched. EJ could feel his son's shame from across the cafeteria, shame for the old black man who wouldn't fight back, who couldn't fight back. The lieutenant leaned close, voice low and venomous. "Welcome to Blackwater, old man. We own you now." Then they left, laughing. Reaper watched from the entrance, a thin smile on his lips, before disappearing back into the corridor. EJ bent down slowly, carefully, and retrieved his cane. Walked to the nearest trash can to scrape egg off his jumpsuit, while inmates whispered and guards pretended they'd seen nothing. But one man didn't look away. Solomon Mitchell was 73 years old, had been inside Blackwater for 42 years, and had forgotten more about prison politics than most inmates would ever learn. He was a former Black Panther, wore his gray hair in short locks, and moved with the dignity of someone who'd survived 4 decades by knowing exactly when to speak and when to stay silent. He approached EJ at the commissary line that afternoon. "You handled that wrong," Solomon said, not unkindly. EJ didn't look at him. "Handled it the way I needed to. They'll keep coming. Escalate. Make an example." "I know." Solomon studied him with eyes that had witnessed every kind of violence prison could offer. "You military?" EJ's hands didn't pause, counting his commissary tickets. "Long time ago." "How long you in for?" 12 months. 12 months, and you won't defend yourself?" Solomon's voice dropped lower. "That's either wisdom or suicide. Haven't figured which yet." Over the next 3 days, EJ cultivated Solomon's friendship with the patience of a man trained in human intelligence gathering. They played chess in the day room, talked about nothing that mattered, and slowly, carefully, EJ asked questions that seemed casual but weren't. "That gang that runs C Block, they always this territorial?" Solomon moved his bishop. "Aryan Guard? They're worse than territorial. They're connected. Reapers got ties to organizations outside these walls. Checkmate, by the way." EJ reset the board. "Heard something about tension with other groups." "There's always tension. But right now," Solomon glanced around, lowered his voice. "Word is something big's coming. They're calling it a race riot. But that's just cover. They're planning something specific." EJ's heart rate didn't change, but every nerve in his body came alive. "When?" 8 days, maybe less. Solomon captured EJ's night. "And there's a target. Black inmate who filed complaints against some of the guard members. Kid named Darius Thompson." EJ's hand froze halfway to his queen. Solomon noticed. "You know him?" "No." The lie came smooth as silk. Common name. But Solomon's eyes said he didn't believe it. That night, EJ lay on his bunk calculating. 8 days until the riot. 8 days to gather intelligence, identify the kill team, and position himself to intercept without revealing his capabilities or his connection to Darius. The second cafeteria incident came on day 4. EJ was carrying his lunch tray when Reaper's lieutenant appeared again, this time with backup. Before EJ could react, the man grabbed his tray and dumped it, then shoved him hard. EJ went down. His cane clattered away. The cafeteria erupted in jeers and laughter. The lieutenant stood over him. "Stay down, old man. Where you belong." From his position on the floor, EJ could see Darius 3 tables away. His son's face was a mask of anger and shame, not for himself, but for the pathetic old man who kept getting humiliated. Solomon's voice cut through the noise. "Old-timer, you gonna let them disrespect you like that?" EJ pulled himself up slowly, brushed off his jumpsuit, retrieved his cane. "Respect doesn't matter," he said quietly. "Survival does." But that night, alone in his cell while Rick snored, EJ stared at the ceiling and did calculations that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with how much longer he could maintain this cover. Because the intelligence was clear now. Darius was the primary target. The race riot was a smokescreen. And EJ had 4 days, maybe less, before his son's name moved from a hit list to a body bag. The question wasn't if he'd have to break cover. The question was how much of his Delta Force training he'd have to reveal to keep his son alive while making it look like luck instead of 3 decades of lethal expertise. And the answer came sooner than expected in the prison library, where 2 of Reaper's men were waiting with something far worse than fists. The prison library was supposed to be neutral ground, a place where even the most hardened inmates observed an unspoken truce, because books were currency, and violence disrupted the ecosystem everyone depended on. But rules meant nothing when Reaper wanted to send a message. EJ had been there for 20 minutes, sitting alone at a corner table with a worn copy of Times. The Count of Monte Cristo, appropriate reading for a man orchestrating his own imprisonment. The irony wasn't lost on him. He sensed them before he saw them. 2 men, moving with purpose. The library's usual afternoon crowd had mysteriously thinned to almost nothing. Even the guard had stepped out for a smoke break that felt far too convenient. They cornered him between the history section and the back wall. The first one was massive, 6'4", probably 240 pounds of prison muscle, with a neck like a tree trunk and teardrops tattooed down his cheek. The second was leaner, quicker, with predator's eyes and hands that never stayed still. "Reading time's over, Grandpa," the big one said. EJ closed his book slowly. "Set it down. Don't want any trouble." "Too late for that." The lean one pulled a shiv from his waistband, a real one, 6 inches of filed-down metal with a cloth-wrapped handle. Prison workshop manufacture. Someone had spent weeks perfecting it. The sight of the weapon changed the equation entirely. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was an execution disguised as a random attack. EJ's mind accelerated into combat mode, that cold operational space, where time dilated and every option crystallized with diamond clarity. He had maybe 3 seconds before they moved. 3 seconds to decide how much of his training to reveal. The big one stepped closer, blocking the sightlines from the library entrance. The lean one shifted his grip on the shiv, blade angled up for a kidney strike, professional technique. These weren't amateurs. "Reaper says hello," the lean one whispered. Then they attacked. The big one came first. Predictably, a haymaker designed to put EJ on the ground so his partner could work the knife. But EJ wasn't there when the fist arrived. He'd shifted 6 inches left, and the 240 pounds of momentum carried the man past him into the bookshelf. The lean one thrust with the shiv, fast and low. EJ's cane came up not as a walking aid now, but as a weapon designed for exactly this scenario. The weighted end intercepted the knife hand at the wrist with a crack that echoed through the library. Bones broke. The shiv clattered to the floor. Before the man could scream, EJ's free hand shot out a throat strike, so precise it collapsed the airway without crushing the trachea. The attacker dropped, gasping silently. The big one had recovered, charging like an enraged bull. This time, EJ couldn't avoid it. Couldn't hide anymore. He stepped into the charge. Not away, using the man's momentum against him. His cane swept low, hooking behind the ankle. His shoulder drove forward into the center mass. Physics did the rest. All 240 pounds went airborne and crashed into the tile floor with a sound like a car accident. The man's head bounced once, didn't get up. Total elapsed time, 4.5 seconds. EJ stood there, breathing normally, while 2 gang members lay unconscious at his feet. The movement had been too clean, too professional. No wasted motion, no panic, just surgical application of force. A voice from the library entrance. Jesus Christ. 3 inmates stood frozen in the doorway, witnessing what no fat old man with a cane should have been capable of. One of them was pulling out his phone contraband that guards pretended not to see, recording the aftermath. EJ bent down, retrieved his book, and shuffled toward the exit. Cane tapping against the floor in that familiar elderly rhythm. But his cover was crumbling like wet paper. By dinner, the whole prison would know. By tomorrow, Reaper would start asking serious questions about who EJ really was. And somewhere in A Block, Darius would hear the stories about the old black man who moved like a ghost and fought like a demon. Solomon found him in the yard that evening, face grave. They're saying you broke Crusher's wrist without even breathing hard. Saying you put Big Mike down like he was a child. EJ said nothing. That wasn't luck, was it? Solomon's voice dropped to barely a whisper. That was training. The kind they don't teach in the regular army. Still nothing. Words spreading fast, real fast. And Reaper? Solomon glanced toward C Block, where the Aryan guard controlled 3 tiers. He's calling a meeting. Tonight. With his whole crew, and probably the Aryan Brotherhood lieutenants from D Block. EJ's jaw tightened. How many? 12. Maybe more. Solomon's eyes held something between respect and fear. They're planning something big. And old man, whatever you are, whoever you really are, you just moved yourself to the top of their list. That night, as EJ lay in his bunk, calculating odds and angles, Rick leaned down from the top bunk. Yo, old head. People saying you're some kind of secret soldier or something? That true? EJ didn't answer, but in the darkness, his hand found the cane resting beside his bunk. The weighted cane he'd built specifically for close quarters combat against multiple opponents in confined spaces. Because he knew had known from the moment that Shiv appeared that his careful cover was disintegrating, that Reaper wouldn't stop until EJ was dead or revealed. And somewhere across 2 cell blocks, his son was sleeping, completely unaware that his estranged father was about to fight a war to save his life. The workshop assignment came the next morning. EJ looked at the duty roster and felt his blood turn cold. Because the prison workshop was where accidents happened, where bodies got lost in machinery, where 12 men with weapons could work in private for exactly as long as they needed. The workshop smelled like sawdust and oil, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor. EJ entered through the metal door, his cane tapping a slow, deliberate rhythm. He'd known it was a trap the moment the guard assigned him here. Reaper's cousin worked the workshop rotation. The door clanged shut behind him. 12 men emerged from behind the machinery. Pipes, sharpened metal, improvised blades wrapped in electrical tape. They spread out in a practice formation, cutting off every exit. Reaper stepped forward, spinning a length of steel pipe in his hand. Heard you got lucky in the library, old man. 12 against 1, let's see how lucky you really are. EJ sighed. The sound of a man who'd postponed the inevitable as long as possible. His fingers loosened on the cane. I was hoping to avoid this. Too late for... The cane whistled through the air before Reaper finished. The weighted end caught the first attacker in the temple. He dropped like a severed puppet string. EJ pivoted, impossibly fast for a man who'd shuffled through these halls for days, and the cane became an extension of his will. Two men rushed from the left. EJ's elbow found the first one's throat, a precise strike that sent him choking to his knees. The cane swept low, shattering the second man's kneecap. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The workshop erupted. They came at him in waves, and EJ moved through them like water through stone, finding every gap, exploiting every mistake. A pipe swung at his head. He ducked beneath it, drove his palm into the attacker's solar plexus, and used the man's falling body as a shield against two more. His movements told a story his mouth never would. 30 years of black ops, hostage rescue in Mogadishu, target elimination in Kandahar, close quarters battle mastery that most operators only read about in classified briefings. A shiv came at his ribs. EJ trapped the arm, twisted, and the weapon clattered away. Joint lock. Controlled fall. The attacker's face met the concrete workbench with a wet crack. 90 seconds in. 7 down. Reaper swung the pipe with everything he had. EJ caught it mid-swing, yanked it forward, and Reaper stumbled into a devastating knee strike. The gang leader crumpled, gasping. The last 4 hesitated. EJ stood among the fallen, not even breathing hard, the cane resting casually against his shoulder. The old man was gone. What remained was something else entirely, something these walls had never contained before. "Run," EJ said quietly. They ran. The guards burst through the door 30 seconds later, flashlights cutting through the dust. 12 men lay scattered across the workshop floor, unconscious, groaning, or staring at the ceiling in shock. EJ stood in the center, cane back in hand, shuffling slowly toward the door. But across the prison, in the rec room of A Block, Darius Thompson looked up from his card game. One of the guards was speaking urgently into his radio, and Darius caught fragments of words. 12 down workshop, old black inmate. His cellmate whistled low. "Yo, D, you hear that? Some old dude just dropped Reaper's whole crew." Darius's hands stilled on his cards. Something cold crawled up his spine. A recognition he couldn't name, a memory 15 years old. "What did they say his name was?" Darius asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The solitary cell was 8 feet by 6, concrete and steel, with a toilet that barely worked and a fluorescent light that never turned off. EJ sat on the thin mattress, eyes closed, listening to the rhythmic drip of water somewhere in the pipes. Standard procedure after any fight, 72 hours in the hole while they investigated. In the adjacent cell, separated by reinforced steel, Kyle Reaper Hendricks wasn't taking his humiliation quietly. That wasn't prison fighting. Reaper's voice cut through the silence. Those weren't survival moves. That was military. Professional. Special forces. EJ remained motionless, breathing steady. "I've seen combat vets before. Hell, we recruit them. But you?" Reaper's laugh was sharp, humorless. "You moved like an operator. Delta. Maybe. SEAL team. Who the hell are you really?" Silence. "You think I can't find out? I got people on the outside. Real connected people." The threat hung in the stale air between their cells. "Your parole violation, possession of an unlicensed weapon. But the timeline's wrong. You've been out for 3 years clean, then suddenly you slip up, 2 weeks before landing here?" EJ heard Reaper shift against the wall, working through the logic. "You're undercover. DEA, FBI, something." Or, a pause. "You got another reason for being here. Something specific." The guards came at hour 68. They escorted EJ back to C Block without ceremony. And he resumed his shuffle, reclaimed his cane, became the old man again, but the mask felt thinner now. Transparent in places where it shouldn't be. The prison had changed in 3 days. Inmates watched him differently. Respect mixed with fear, curiosity with caution. The workshop story had spread like wildfire. 12 men. Under 2 minutes. An old man with a cane who moved like death itself. In A Block, the story had reached different ears. Darius Thompson sat at a metal table in the rec room, cards forgotten in his hands. His cellmate, Marcus, leaned in with that hungry look people get when sharing prison gossip. "Yo, D, you hear about C-Block? Some old dude took down Reaper's whole crew, all 12, in the workshop." Darius's jaw tightened. "That's crazy." "Nah, man," guards confirmed it. "They found them laid out like somebody ran a clinic." One dude said the old man fought like military, like special ops military. Marcus dealt another hand. "They saying he's gotta be former special forces or some shit. Maybe undercover." "What's his name?" Darius heard himself ask. "Don't know. But he's black. Old like 60-something, walks with a cane. Been here? Maybe 2 weeks." 2 weeks. The same amount of time since Darius had received that strange feeling, that prickling awareness he couldn't name. The same 2 weeks he'd been having dreams about his childhood, about a man in uniform lifting him onto broad shoulders, about a voice he hadn't heard in 15 years. Thompson, Elijah Thompson. A guard walking past dropped the name casually, not realizing what he'd just detonated. "That's the guy from the workshop." Darius's cards slipped from his fingers, scattering across the table. His cellmate was still talking, but the words became white noise. Elijah Thompson. His father's name. His absent, ghost of a man. Father who'd chosen every mission over every birthday. Every deployment over every graduation. Here, in Blackwater, in the same prison. After 15 years of silence, Darius stood abruptly, chair scraping concrete. His hands were shaking from rage or something else, he couldn't tell. "D? You good?" But Darius was already walking toward the window that overlooked the main yard, searching the sea of orange jumpsuits for a face he tried to forget. Yard time came at 1400 hours. The sun beat down on concrete and razor wire, turning Blackwater's recreation area into a pressure cooker of tension and territorial boundaries. EJ shuffled out with the C-Block population, his cane tapping its familiar rhythm. But his eyes, hidden behind the performance, were scanning, calculating, searching. And there he was. Darius Thompson stood near the basketball court, taller than EJ remembered, broader in the shoulders, 28 years old now, a man. The last time EJ had seen him, Darius was 13, still believing his father might come home for good someday. EJ's chest tightened. He forced himself to look away, to focus on the weathered face of Solomon who'd settled onto a bench nearby. "You see something over there, old-timer?" Solomon's voice was low, curious. The former Black Panther missed nothing. "Nothing important," EJ muttered. Solomon followed EJ's previous line of sight. "That young brother by the court? Darius Thompson. Good kid. Keeps his head down mostly. Got caught up in something stupid on the outside. Wrong place. Wrong time." A pause. "You know him?" EJ's fingers tightened on his cane. "Long time ago." Before Solomon could press further, a commotion rippled through the yard. Inmates were pointing, whispering, staring at EJ with a mixture of respect and fear. The workshop story had elevated him to legend status overnight. Near the basketball court, Darius's friend, a wiry kid named T-Block, grabbed Darius's arm, gesturing frantically toward C-Block's section. "Yo, D. That's him. That's the dude who dropped Reaper's whole squad." Darius turned, following T-Block's finger. Their eyes met across 50 yards of concrete. Time fractured. EJ saw the exact moment recognition hit the way Darius's body went rigid. The way his face shifted from curiosity to shock to something darker. Disbelief. Then, anger. "Dad?" The word was silent on Darius's lips, but EJ read it clearly. EJ looked away immediately, resuming his shuffle toward the far corner of the yard. "Keep distance. Maintain the mission. Don't compromise him." But he could feel Darius's stare burning into his back. "That boy knows you," Solomon observed quietly. "And he don't look happy about it." Across the yard, T-Block was rapid-firing questions. "You know that old head? How you know him?" Darius couldn't speak. His mind was reeling through impossible calculations. His father, his ghost of a man. Absent for 15 years, father was here. In Blackwater, in the same prison, The man who'd missed every birthday, every graduation, every moment that mattered, was suddenly shuffling around C-Block like he belonged here. When did he get here? Darius's voice came out rough. 3 weeks ago? Why? 2 weeks. Right around when Darius started getting those strange warnings from other inmates. Right around when the Aryan guard had started watching him more closely. Right around when... That's my father, Darius said flatly. T-Block's jaw dropped. That's the dude who beat down 12. That's your pops? Darius pushed past him, heading toward the guard station. He needed information. Records. He needed to know why Elijah Thompson, career soldier who'd chosen every war over his own son, was suddenly serving time in Blackwater Penitentiary. 10 minutes later, after calling in a favor with a sympathetic guard, Darius had his answer. Parole violation. Unlicensed weapon possession. Sentenced 2 weeks ago. 12 months. 2 weeks ago, Darius stood in the corridor, hands shaking, staring at the intake document. His father had been out for 3 years clean. No violations. No trouble. Then suddenly, conveniently, he gets popped for something and ends up here. In the exact prison where Darius was serving time. That's not coincidence, Darius whispered to himself. Back in his cell, he paced like a caged animal. T-Block watched nervously from his bunk. D. What you thinking? He came here on purpose. Darius's voice was tight with fury and confusion. My father, who hasn't spoken to me in 15 years, somehow gets himself arrested and sent to my prison. He spun toward T-Block. Why? Why now? Why? Why? Maybe he heard you were in trouble? Then he could have written, called, come to visit like a normal. Darius stopped himself. Normal fathers. His father was a lot of things, but normal wasn't one of them. 3 days. That's what the whisper said. Reaper was planning something big in 3 days. And now his father, the Delta Force operator who could take down 12 men without breaking a sweat, was here. Watching, waiting, protecting. Darius sank onto his bunk, head in his hands. One question burned through everything else. The question that would haunt him until he got an answer. What does my father know that I don't? 3 days later, the yard exploded. It started small, a shove near the weight pit, harsh words by the basketball court, but EJ recognized the choreography immediately. Staged incidents, simultaneous flashpoints designed to overwhelm the guards and create chaos. Classic diversion tactics. The race riot had begun. Inmates scattered as fights erupted across the recreation area. Guards rushed toward the most visible conflicts, radios crackling, whistles screaming. Exactly as Reaper had planned, draw their attention to the noise while the real work happened in the confusion. EJ moved through the chaos with purpose, his shuffle abandoned. His eyes tracked one figure through the mayhem. Darius, near the medical building, looking around in confusion as violence bloomed around him. Then EJ saw them, 8 men, moving with coordinated intent through the chaos. Reaper's crew, all of them converging on Darius's position from different angles, weapons concealed in their jumpsuits. Darius saw them too late. He backed toward the wall as they closed in, forming a tight circle that cut him off from the guard's line of sight. One of them pulled a sharpened blade from his waistband. EJ was already running. He hit the first attacker like a freight train, driving his weighted cane into the man's kidney. The attacker dropped. The others turned, startled, and found themselves facing something they'd never seen before. Not the shuffling old man, but the operator beneath. Get away from him. EJ's voice was cold. Professional. The voice that had given orders in a dozen war zones. They came at him together. Smart. But not smart enough. EJ's movements were surgical. A throat strike dropped the second man. The cane spun, catching another attacker's temple with devastating precision. Joint locks. Pressure points. Disarms executed with the efficiency of 3 decades doing exactly this kind of work. But there were 8 of them, and they were young and desperate. A blade came from his left. EJ twisted, but not fast enough. White-hot pain lanced through his side as the shiv punched through his jumpsuit and into his ribs. He felt the steel scrape bone. Dad, Darius's voice cut through the noise. EJ ignored the pain. drove his elbow into his attacker's face, and kept fighting. Another attacker down, another weapon stripped away. Blood soaked his orange jumpsuit, spreading dark and wet, but his hands stayed steady. Darius grabbed a dropped pipe and swung it into one attacker's legs. Father and son fought back to back now, neither speaking, bound by something more primal than words. The last attacker stumbled backward as EJ's cane caught his jaw. He dropped, 8 men down. The yard was still chaos, but this circle was quiet except for groaning. EJ swayed, his hand pressed to his bleeding side. The adrenaline was fading, and with it, his strength. "Dad, Darius reached for him. You're safe," EJ managed, his voice rough. "That's all that matters." The world tilted. EJ's knees buckled, and he felt himself falling. Strong arms caught him, his son's arms, the same arms he'd lifted onto his shoulders when Darius was 5 years old. "Stay with me," Darius pleaded, lowering him to the concrete. Blood pooled beneath them. "Dad, please, stay with me." Guards flooded the yard, medical teams rushing through the chaos with stretchers and supplies. EJ's vision was tunneling, darkening at the edges. But through it all, he saw his son's face above him, terrified, angry, desperate, alive. The last thing EJ heard before consciousness slipped away was Darius's voice, cracking with emotion he'd kept buried for 15 years. "Don't you dare die on me." The medical wing smelled like antiseptic and regret. EJ woke to the steady beep of monitors and the dull ache of stitches holding his side together. 17 stitches, the doctor had said. The blade had missed anything vital by millimeters. Luck or muscle memory had twisted him just enough. The door opened. Darius stood in the threshold, looking like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. "They said you were awake." Darius stepped inside, leaving the door open like he might need to escape. He pulled a chair close, but didn't sit. "FBI was here. Said you were feeding them intelligence on some neo-Nazi network. Said that's why you're really here." EJ met his son's eyes. The official cover story, his secondary mission that made everything legal, explainable. But not the whole truth. Never the whole truth. "That's part of it," EJ said carefully. "And the other part?" Darius's voice was hard, but his hands trembled. "You left Mom and me for your missions. 28 years of choosing wars over birthdays, deployments over graduations. Why come now? Why here?" The question hung between them, the one that mattered most. EJ could tell him, could explain the anonymous tip, the manufactured arrest, the desperate father's gambit to save a son who'd stopped taking his calls 15 years ago. But that would make Darius feel obligated, guilty, indebted. All the things EJ had spent his life trying to avoid placing on his son's shoulders. "I heard you were in danger," EJ said instead. "I couldn't stay away this time. You could have written, called, done, literally anything else. Would you have listened?" Silence. They both knew the answer. Darius finally sat, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "You chose the army over your family for 28 years. I did." EJ's voice was steady, unflinching. No excuses. No justifications. "And I'm not asking you to forgive that. I missed everything that mattered. Your first words. Your first game. The day you needed your father most, I was on some classified op halfway around the world." He paused, letting the truth settle. "But this time, I had a choice, and I chose you." Darius looked up, eyes wet. "I don't know how to. I can't just." "I know. I'm not asking you to." They sat in silence, the monitors beeping, measuring heartbeats, and the space between what was broken and what might someday heal. 2 weeks later, EJ walked out of Blackwater without fanfare. His sentence quietly commuted for cooperation with federal investigators. Reaper and his lieutenants were in Supermax, facing federal hate crime charges. Darius was transferred to a minimum security facility upstate. His release date moved up for good behavior. EJ drove away alone, watching the prison shrink in his rearview mirror. 6 months later, he sat in his truck outside Blackwater's main gate, engine idling, coffee growing cold in the cup holder. Darius's release day. EJ had no idea if his son would want to see him. No guarantees. No promises. Just the simple act of showing up. The gate opened. Inmates filtered out in civilian clothes, squinting in the sunlight, clutching property bags. Then Darius emerged. He stopped when he saw the truck, his father's silhouette visible through the windshield. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Darius walked to the passenger side, opened the door, stood there, 1 foot on the running board. "You didn't have to wait," Darius said quietly. "Yeah," EJ replied. "I did." Darius climbed in. They sat in silence as EJ pulled onto the highway, heading north toward a future neither could predict. The road stretched ahead long, uncertain, but traveled together. EJ's voice, quiet and reflective, broke the silence. "I spent 30 years fighting wars in the shadows. Missed birthdays, graduations, your entire childhood. When I found out someone wanted to kill you, I didn't call in favors or send operators. I went myself. Got arrested. Got locked up. Became your invisible guardian." He glanced at his son. "You'll probably never know I manufactured that entire thing just to be in that prison with you. And that's okay. Because some missions aren't about medals or recognition. Some missions are about becoming the father you should have been all along. Even if no one ever knows." Darius turned to look at him, something shifting in his expression, not forgiveness yet, but the first fragile thread of understanding. "Thanks, Dad," he whispered. The truck disappeared down the highway, carrying 2 men toward redemption neither had thought possible. This story hit different, didn't it? Sometimes the most powerful battles aren't fought with weapons. They're fought with sacrifice, presence, and the courage to show up when it matters most. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button, because there are hundreds more stories like this one. Stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, about redemption, second chances, and the kind of courage that changes everything. Your next favorite story is waiting. Don't miss it.